Greetings, my beautiful lovelies. It's Emmy. How are you? It's great to see you and welcome back. Today I'm going to be making bread in a bag. A few of you got in touch with me via social media. You can follow me down here. Oh, and subscribe if you're not subscribed already. And pointed out that there's a recipe that you can make bread in a bag. I mean, not technically, you're just making the dough in the bag. You still have to bake the dough in an oven. Just a little bit misleading, but it made me think of a recipe that I had in one of my numerous cookbooks. Many lovelies through the years have sent me different cookbooks, including this one. And this one was sent to me by Travis and Nomi. Thank you so much for being patient, kind, and thoughtful and sending me this cookbook. I have many, many cookbooks, lots of treasures from so many lovelies like yourselves. So thanks so much. So this cookbook is called Favorite Recipes, Indian Community Food Advisors. Now this comes from a very terrible chapter in U.S. history in which Native peoples were taken from their land stolen from them, and they were relocated to reservations where they were removed from the food systems that nourished them for generations, including fishing, foraging, growing, farming. All those things were taken from them because they were no longer on their lands. They were relocated to reservations, lands that they were unfamiliar with. The travel was often deadly, and they were given provisions that they were unfamiliar with and often in a bad state. So that's a little bit of the background behind a cookbook like this, where there are simple, inexpensive meals that you can create using flour, baking soda, lard, some of the things that were given as rations. So it's a very no frills book, no illustrations, but pretty simple recipes, including this one, which I think is quite interesting. It's called Whole Wheat Master Mix, and it's essentially flour, a little bit of dry milk powder, and baking powder as a leavening, and some shortening that's cut into it. So essentially it's a homemade version of Bisquick, which is something you can buy at the supermarket here in the States, where you can add milk to it, add some eggs to it, you can make pancakes, you can make waffles, you can make a bunch of different things, and that's what this sounds like it is. So maybe that's worthy of another video. So let me know in the comments if you want to see some recipes made with this master mix. So this is the recipe we'll be making today, bread in a bag, a very simple and easy way to make homemade bread. So let's go ahead and get started. So after reading the ingredients, there's nothing particularly special about this bread recipe. I think it's mostly just the idea of mixing everything in a plastic bag. You don't have to dirty any bowls. You still have to knead the dough on a surface, so it doesn't really eliminate that step either. I think it's just the novelty of making something in a bag. It also reminds me of friendship bread that my roommate Jamie made back when I was in college, and it was a starter of some kind, and you made the bread. It was sweet cinnamon bread, as I remember, but when you gave the loaf of bread to a friend, you would also give them a bag of the starter as well, so they could make it themselves and then also give the starter to other people, hence the name friendship bread. Jamie, if you're watching, I hope you are well. Alrighty, so we need a plastic bag. So in a plastic bag, combine 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 1 package of dry yeast, sugar, dry milk powder. Now, besides adding a little bit of protein, milk powder is also used in baking to increase leavening, so you get a taller loaf, which is pretty cool. Mine's a little bit dry. That's all right, it'll mix in. Okay, milk powder and salt. So now we're going to close this up. This would be a fun recipe to make with the kids, because kids love to do things like this. Squish things, shake things. I remember baking bread in elementary school. I believe it was 5th grade. And everyone got to take home a little tiny loaf. It was so much fun. But I remember there was a batch. Was I in the batch or not? I don't remember. But there was a batch of tiny loaves that didn't rise. I don't know if they forgot the yeast or if the yeast was bad, but I remember distinctly they were just kind of solid loaves. They're a little bit sad. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed baking in class. It was supposed to be for history, but of course I've forgotten the history. So to this, we're going to add some hot water. This is actually just warm water because we do not want to kill our yeast. And some oil. This is just a neutral flavored oil. I believe this is grapeseed oil. Any neutral plain vegetable oil will work. So 3 tablespoons of that. And then we're going to close it up again. Zipper it up and then remove most of the air so that we don't have an air pocket. And it'll be easier to mix. And then you just give it a good massage. See, this is the part that kids would love, right? It's like slime or something. So this is really nice because you can see through the bag and see if you've got any dry patches. So let that mix together. I have some clumps of dry milk powder in there, so I really want to make sure that that gets mixed in. Okay, so I'm gonna let that rest for just a few minutes before we move on to the next step. Alrighty, so now we're gonna open our bag again. The mixture is very wet. It's almost like more like a slurry or a gravy than a batter or dough. Now we're gonna add a cup of whole wheat flour, which will make it a little more healthy. Same thing, we're gonna remove most of the air and then knead that into the wet mixture. And the reason why we want to remove the air is, well, with a big air bubble, it makes it difficult to squeeze this. You'll just be like wanting to pop, and we don't want our bag to pop. All right, it's pretty wet. You want to mix this until there aren't any dry patches. I think this would be pretty fun for a classroom too. You could just pass it around the bag so everyone gets to squeeze it. Although this just makes one loaf, so maybe have multiple bags. All right, so that's the whole wheat flour. See how wet it is? And now we're going to add more regular AP flour. I'm gonna add about half of it and see how that goes. It says just add it, gradually add the remaining flour to make the dough stiff enough to pull away from the sides of the bag. So it'll definitely take at least that half cup. So add that in there and then we'll add the rest and see how it goes. I think in this case, a zipper bag might be a little bit easier, one of the kinds that have a little slider, just because we are opening and closing this bag quite a bit. Still very wet, but it is starting to pull away. So a little bit more, half of that, and continue kneading. Squish, 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 squish. So it is a little bit tricky to kind of maneuver the dough around. I don't know if this is an improvement to just using a bowl. Guess you're not dirtying up a bowl. Maybe that's an advantage. So I'm just gonna go ahead and add all of this because I have a pretty wet patch right here. Now we're gonna turn this out. See, this part's really sticky. Well, this part's not as sticky. That's all right. We'll figure that out when we start kneading it. So now we have our ball of dough and we are going to knead this for 2 to 4 minutes until smooth and elastic. This is my favorite part anyways of making bread, is the kneading. I know some other people don't like it as much, but I really love feeling the transformation. It's a little bit shaggy, right? But just with a little bit of effort, we can get our dough to become nice and smooth and cooperative. Okay, I think I've been kneading for maybe a minute and already it's so supple. See how like smoother it is? You can feel it when you're kneading it, how it changes. Okay, beautiful ball of dough. Now I'm gonna cover this with a tea towel for 10 minutes to let it rest, and that will allow the gluten to kind of relax a little bit and make it a little bit easier to shape. And then we will put this in its pan so it can rise. Alrighty, be back in 10 minutes. Alrighty, lovelies, it's been 10 minutes since we let our dough ball rest. So now we're supposed to roll this out to about 12 by 7 inches. It doesn't have to be exact, we're just shaping the loaf here. Isn't this a funny rolling pin? It's got little nubbles on it. Yo, focus. Camera, you can do it. So the dough's not supposed to stick because it's got those nubbies. Interesting, huh? It's supposed to also be good for degassing when you are like working the gas out of a risen dough. It's That's what I've been told. I'm just using it because it's a handy size for this size piece of dough. All right, I think we're there. Yo, yes. Now, got a baking pan that I'm going to spray with a little bit of oil. The sides and the bottom. This is a loaf pan that's roughly 8.5 inches long, about 4 inches wide, and about 3.5 inches deep. So a little bit smaller than a standard loaf pan. And I got a set of these from the thrift store. Love getting pans from the thrift store. Okay, so now we're just gonna roll this up. Roll it up. And then the seam right here, we're just going to pinch to close. So there's our beautiful little log, and we're going to place it into our pan. Just like that. Now, we're gonna let this rise. Oh, I should cover it. It doesn't say to cover it, but whenever I rise my bread, I cover it because we don't want it to dry out. Now, this is a shower cap. Love these for proofing bread. Use them over and over and over again. So put that on there. And this recipe has specific directions on how to let this proof. So we've got heat-proof dish, nice and shallow. We're gonna add some boiling water. What we're doing is creating a warm, kind of humid environment to encourage our yeast to eat and grow, and that will create the fluff or oomph in our bread. Now we top it with another dish, it says, and then place this on top. So now this is nice and toasty. This will encourage the yeast to do its little happy thing and hasten the rising. It says it only takes 20 minutes or so, or until it's doubled. If you happen to have a microwave, another great way to proof your baked goods is to take a glass of water and heat it in the microwave for a minute, 2 minutes, so it gets nice and steamy. Then move the glass aside, then place your proofing pastry or whatever, bread dough, into the microwave, close the door, let it sit there for about an hour, and your dough should rise very, very nicely in that humid, warm environment. So for a pan of this size, I would say you would know it's doubled when the bread dough kind of just barely crests the top, or begins to crest the top of the edge of this pan. Then it's doubled. Another way you can check is if you push it gently with 2 fingers and the indentation stays, then it's properly proofed. Then we're going to pop it into a preheated 375-degree Fahrenheit oven and bake it for 25 minutes until it's nice and golden. And then we'll taste our loaf of bread in a bag. Alrighty, my lovelies, the bread is finished and it looks pretty good. Nice crust on the top, on the sides. Missed a little bit in the pan there, but it came out pretty easily. And it's been cooling here for about 10 minutes, so this is still pretty warm. Whenever you bake bread, they tell you to wait for it to cool completely before slicing, but most of the times I can't wait. But it is better to be patient, so then all that moisture can kind of steam off and then get back into the bread. So a couple of notes before we taste this. The recipe said to wait 20 minutes for this to double in size, and I followed the method in terms of placing it on the warmer and all that good stuff, and in 20 minutes my dough was definitely not doubled. In fact, it took about 2 hours for the dough to actually crest, and even so there was not a lot of oven spring. Oven spring is when you place your dough in the oven and the heat of the oven causes the yeast to do its final little poof, and you get an extra little rise in the oven. And mine did not rise all that much higher than what it had doubled on the counter. So I'm really glad that I took the extra time to allow the dough to fully rise. Otherwise, my bread would have been just like the one I described when I was in elementary school. It would have been very, very low. So make sure you get a full rise before you bake it. Also, it should be noted that this recipe contains 1 cup of whole wheat flour, and generally speaking, when you use whole wheat flour, your breads tend not to be as tall. Sometimes wheat gluten is added just for that reason, so you can get an extra lift because the whole wheat flour is denser from my understanding. So that may be another reason why this bread isn't as tall. So if this was made with a full 3 cups of just all-purpose flour, as opposed to 2 cups of all-purpose and 1 cup of whole wheat, I think this bread would have been taller. So I made the recipe again just using all-purpose flour and no whole wheat flour, and the bread rose higher. I also proofed it twice, once in a plastic bag where it got nice and puffy, and then I proofed it again in the baking pan. And the resulting bread was a little bit taller than the whole wheat version. Both versions were delicious. And here's what it looks like inside. Beautiful loaf of bread. Bread in a bag. So if you're looking for a softer, taller version, I would go 100% all-purpose flour. Are you a bread heel person? My son, my oldest son, is definitely a heel person, so I will save that piece for him. Look at that crumb. Beautiful. Oh, another note. I cooked this for an additional 10 minutes. The recipe said 25 minutes, but when I took the internal temperature, this was at 170 degrees, and usually for bread, it's about 190. So I gave an extra 10 more minutes. And that looks gorgeous. All right, I'm cutting this awkwardly so you can see it better on camera. Oh, that looks great. Freshly baked bread, I tell you. It's just so good. Look at that, beautiful. I'm gonna add some butter on it. This butter's cold, but the bread is hot. Have you ever had a slab of butter on bread, almost like cheese? It's fantastic. Alrighty. What am I calling this? Bread in a bag. Let's give it a taste. Itadakimasu. Butter's so good. That bread is nice. The whole wheat gives it a earthier, grainier flavor. There's a little bit of sweetness from the sugar. Nice tight crumb, one that I would associate with like sandwich bread. Yet it's still soft. And the whole wheat flour gives it a little bit of a sturdiness too to the bread. Like the crust. It goes so well with salted butter. Delicious. Alrighty, final thoughts on this recipe. Besides making homemade bread, which I think is always a win, I think what this recipe's got going for it is cleanup. There wasn't a lot of cleanup because we did all that mixing in a bag rather than a series of bowls. So there's that. Alright, my lovelies, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that one. I hope you learned something. Please share this video with your friends. Follow me on social media, like this video, subscribe, and I shall see you in the next one. Toodaloo, take care, bye! Just one more little taste of wheat-filled bread, because I'm not supposed to be eating too much because my face was full. Fresh baked bread, I tell ya.